when we looked at the conventional roles, I had spent more than a week, I think, reading through the 64 pages or whatever, to skimming them, really. They're not rules that are made to be read, really. They're so repetitive, they're so dense that, that was an issue. It helps me to find things, but honestly, I don't have the will to do that again for the intervention roles and the optional roles. So I'm going to hit them here as we go through. First thing we have is a more detailed sequence of play. Some new steps with the star is the intervention game ones. Yeah, they're the white. I thought they were the optional. So just to take a look at some of the special things we have naval bombardment for the U.S. Guerrilla attack, which is going to be insurgency type actions to damage installations and maybe units as well. No. There's an Allied reaction air mission phase where the U.S. Marines air units are able to do defensive close air support. So far we haven't had defensive close air support. Now we have it, which is a specific thing. And we also have possibility of using standoff attacks there. Going over to the communist side of things, and it is a little asymmetrical here. We have a demolitions phase where there can be attempts to destroy Allied locations that are occupied, and a repair phase where damaged stuff can be repaired. Now, again, that is actually on both sides. Oh, we're in the communist stage here. Okay. So these are things, I don't know what the fuck we're doing. Oh, well. And then we have a matching here. So the only thing that's particularly asymmetrical is the night naval bombardment. These are all communist actions. The attack, a guerrilla attack, the demolitions, the repair, the U.S. night naval bombardment is a special thing that happens during the communist stage, a chance to, I guess, blow some shit up with naval support. And the Allied reaction phase is specific to the Allies during the communist turn. You have a matching of the capabilities, actually, for the guerrilla attack, demolitions, and repair. Okay. Intervention air rolls. Okay. So the next scenario we're going to play is actually, it's hiding over here. It's the tiny little intervention game scenario to help teach you at the SS-20 incident. It is a hypothetical, hey, there's, I think they're medium range, nuclear missiles, or nuclear capable missiles being imported into Nicaragua, and it's like a Cuban Missile Crisis type situation. And I've started setting it up. First thing we have here is we're going to have a couple carrier groups positioned in the Pacific holding box. And this is basically an air box. I made a mess somehow. I must have bumped the counters earlier, but basically you have all kinds of planes in the ready position. The Allied air mission map can be placed anywhere within 10 hexes of where the E2 AWACS unit assignments to that carrier are in play. And we're going to be putting some AWACS at the beginning of the game to indicate where those carrier groups are centered, more or less. The air units are subject to enemy interception as soon as they're detectable. The U.S. Navy can form joint missions with U.S. Marines at air facilities on the map if they're within 10 hexes of an E2. The Navy and Marines can perform joint missions, but neither of these branches can perform joint missions with the U.S. Air Force. All the units in a carrier can perform an alpha strike, one single air mission together. You're only allowed to do one alpha strike per carrier in a holding box. Well, so otherwise you're limited by the mission size rules in general. You can't put the U.S. Navy air units on an air facility. The Navy and Marine units, only U.S. Navy and Marine units can be based on those boxes, and they have to they have to stay on the same side of the map consistently. You're not going to be able to slip through the Panama Canal unless there's some special rules that say that. Oh. If U.S. air units from a holding box form joint missions with the Allied air units on the map, the air mission marker begins moving either. So I didn't think that was allowed. So that's interesting. I think they're allowed to perform combined missions with non-U.S. Air Force. This is the inter-service rivalries. Yeah, we can work with the Hondurans. We're just not going to work with the USAF. The E2 AWACS, they're going to be on one of these detection boxes, and they have a 10 hex detection range. That's the general case of it. You can move a carrier group through the Panama Canal. Okay. You take the carrier-based air units and place them 2 boxes ahead on the game turn, and then they've made it through, unless there's some restriction on that. So this is kind of the opposite of what I said, but I'm, making it up as I go. You could also delay to go to the other coast. The U.S. Marines may have units that come in with an air carrier group. Those Marine units can be based on a carrier, or and if you do so, you have to withdraw U.S. Navy air units from the carrier group to do so. And those Navy units will never be on the game. They can also, though, base on the ground, which is interesting. And they give rules for how close you can get. It's like 4 hexes from the map edge in Honduras. There's some B-52s in this scenario. Yeah, we're bringing the big boys out. These are in a holding box. They have unlimited range. Otherwise, they're planes, but we can see they have some special rules. They can never be based on the map. Oh, some of the planes they can only be based in an airport. I don't know if I mentioned that before. They're just too big to be used on airstrips. The B-52s can form joint missions with Air Force units on the map. They cannot join with U.S. Navy, Marine, or Allied air units on a mission. They can't perform... Okay, let's look. They can't perform defensive close air support missions. Well, that's only a Marine thing, I think. For offensive close air support, a U.S. ground unit has to be adjacent to the target hex. They cannot perform interception. Yeah. They cannot perform bombardment strike in allied countries in unoccupied hexes containing roads or in cities, towns, villages, or ports. They can do bombardment strikes in road and village hexes in allied countries if the enemy regular ground units occupy the hex, not insurgency. They cannot eliminate the last step among communist ground units in a hex with a bombardment strike. If this happens, that loss is ignored. And they can only operate off the holding box. They're only allowed 1 mission per turn. I think that's standard, so I don't know why that's specified. There might be something I'm missing. The US AV-8Bs are VTOL planes, I believe. They have a number of different values, including a ground combat value down here. They're sort of like helicopters. They can perform all combat missions, including ground support combat missions, although the Allied player does not get a column shift for AV-8Bs as he does for attack helicopters. They can perform defensive close air support missions for a stack of Allied units containing at least one U.S. Marine unit. The AV-8Bs have two values for their movement radius, depending on where they're based. They can be based in Pacific Caribbean holding boxes, at air facilities, or in friendly supplied hexes. They enter the game with U.S. Marine markers. They'll be placed in the available air unit space of the Pacific or Caribbean holding box. They have a movement radius of 12 while in that box, and can be activated to perform missions with U.S. Marine or Navy. Unlike other U.S. air units, the AV-8Bs move with the air mission marker during a mission. They'll be stacked in it, but they'll be on the map. Any number can occupy a holding box. You do not have to replace U.S. Navy air units with the AV-8Bs. An AV-8B that's activated from a holding box does not have to return to it. It can return to a friendly air facility or a friendly supplied hex. If they're based at an air facility, it has a movement radius of 12, but it doesn't go on the air group display, and it doesn't count towards stacking or activation. It can form joint missions with U.S. Marine air units at other facilities, as per the EW connection. They can perform joint missions with U.S. Navy, but not other things. Like helicopters, they can land and be activated from friendly supplied hexes. Here are the types of hexes they can be at. They're all special. No. Clear and rough terrain hexes containing supplied U.S. Marine ground units. Any coast hex containing U.S. Marine ground units. If they're not at an air facility, they only have a movement radius of 3. They're always in supply in the holding boxes. If they're at an air facility or whatever, they have to trace supply normally. If they're out of supply, they have reduced values of movement, combat, bombardment, and they can only perform transfer missions. Intervention air missions. There's some new air missions in the game. The U.S. Marine Close Air Support Mission. This is allowed with U.S. Marine air units and the AV-8Bs. We don't have any in this upcoming scenario, but that's okay. We have some special forces. A U.S. Marine air unit can perform one close air support mission against communist ground units that are about to attack Allied ground units. This is similar to an offensive close air support mission in the conventional game. Only the U.S. Marine F-4, F-18, and AV-8Bs can do it. You're only allowed one defensive close air support mission with one air unit. And the target has to be an all-communist ground unit in a hex that's adjacent to Allied ground units. There must be at least one defending U.S. Marine unit. Let's move to the hex with the communist units. Can be intercepted. The Allied player declares the number of bombardment points. Yeah. There's going to be a USMC defensive support marker with a -1 or -2 based on the number of bombardments, and then it returns. In the subsequent combat ground phase, this stack suffers a -1 or -2 modifier on all ground combats against Allied units. It does not matter if it actually is attacking the Marines. It just has to be threatening the Marines, and then they'll throw the support in. Merchant shipping raids. In some scenarios, communist units can move off map to do this mission. M27, S24, and T22s can do this. They have to have a bombardment value of 2 or more. Well, I hope those all do. They appear to here. 4 communist air units can perform the mission per turn. You can do this as a joint mission from different facilities. Other air units can act as escorts. The mission is performed 3 consecutive game turns. As soon as the first merchant shipping raid mission is performed, the communist player can do it the same the next 2 game turns, and then it's not allowed anymore. This is because there's some surprise, and air defense and shipping gets air defense gets improved, shipping gets rerouted, etc. The communist player sets aside the air units performing the mission. He puts his air mission marker on the map. This is normal stuff. It moves to the east map edge. Must be half movement radius to the east map edge, or you can't do it. When it reaches the map edge, it's removed from the map, and the air units are placed in the merchant shipping raid box. They do nothing else. At the end of turn stage, the communists get 1 victory point per air unit in the box. During the end turn stage, it returns back to the facilities in movement radius, and they go back to available. And remember, they can do it 3 turns in a row. Once it's done, once the clock has started, that 3 turns is the only times they can do it. In Messiah, the electronic capability of Messiah is permanently eliminated by M results in the conventional game. Now it can be repaired. You get a damage marker on the hex. The damage can be repaired if an allied unit solely occupies Messiah. The Messiah EW destroyed marker is put in the hex. If Messiah is recaptured later by the communists, the marker remains in the hex for the rest of the game. So you have to capture it to destroy it now. Bombardment only does damage, which can be repaired. You can also suppress it. When Allied bombardment gets a D result, the electronic capacity is suppressed for the rest of the current turn and throughout the next turn. And there's a marker for that. Okay, I need to pause. Okay, let's start trying to look at some of this other crap here. U.S. naval support, night naval bombardment. Apparently there are points you have available. Has to be within 5 hexes of a beachhead if that's in play. Otherwise you can go anywhere on the coast. No idea what this is. It's got a bombardment value of 10. So each time you fire it off, it's like an airstrike of 10 on something, I guess. Tactical bombardment, no idea. In a given ground phase, you have 3 U.S. tactical bombardments against coast hexes. These are performed by air units assigned to ships, escorting carriers, and transport ships. They're going to be a +3 die roll modifier when attacking the enemy units in the ground combat phase. Each has to be on a different hex. You have, again, a set of points available that you can fire these off. You can't do it in Costa Rica. You can't do it in El Salvador or Honduras on a port, town, or village. And there are certain specific locations you can't do it on in Nicaragua. You can't do it over in the lakes. It's only used for Allied attacks, and they can be used with U.S. Marine assaults. Amphibious assaults. The U.S. Marine units can provide, and again, this is stuff that intervention game scenarios don't all have. So, like, you're not going to be sending the U.S. Marine Corps into most of the campaigns, even that are in the game. They are possible to happen in certain very escalated situations and in certain things from the scenario generator. But in general, this didn't happen, right? So what happens with U.S. Marine assaults? And these are things you barely have to look up because you probably never play with them. Units in the Pacific can use... Okay. U.S. ground units can do amphibious assaults in ground hexes during regular ground unit movement. The U.S. Marines must begin regular ground unit movement phase in Pacific or Caribbean holding box. 2 amphibious assaults can occur in a turn if Marine ground units occupy both, but only one holding box. Each holding box can only do one of these fuckers. 4 Marine ground units can be involved in an assault. They can attack up to 2 adjacent hexes. They take place in hexes with clear, rough swamp or forest. It can contain enemy units. If it doesn't have units, the Marines make it in. They can move up to a hex after placement. They can move from one hex in an enemy zone of control to another. If the assault does contain enemy units, the Marines are in the water. And during the Allied air mission phase, you can do combat missions. During ground combat, you do ground combat. If the enemy units are eliminated or forced to retreat, the U.S. units are placed. And if they do not leave the hex, the U.S. Marine units take an extra step loss and return back to the holding box. If they enter a coast hex, you can put the USMC beachhead marker. This is going to be a supply source. The communists in a hex being amphibious assaulted have their defense doubled if attacked solely by the Marines. Attack helicopters that are defending do not get doubled. You're allowed to attack just one coastal hex, even if you're adjacent to two. The communist player must retreat his ground units if called upon to do so, unless his units occupy a city. Unlike other combats where retreat is voluntary, if he takes an extra step loss, you can't choose to do that. If the amphibious assault is successful, all Marine ground units are eligible to enter the vacated hex. But the Allied player cannot have Marine units enter a hex in violation of the 4-unit stacking restriction, which shouldn't happen because they've got 4 units, there. But if there's support coming from other places. U.S. Marine headquarters, they're available during scenarios. They can be placed in holding boxes along with AV-8Bs. They don't take up Navy air units. They can perform air missions from the holding box, moving up to their movement radius from the edge of the map. They got transport helicopters, attack helicopters. They work as it should be expected. You've got Marine combat air units. They enter as reinforcements, coming on either as replacements for U.S. Navy units, which is probably a dumb idea, or you can transfer them onto the board. Supply comes from the USMC beachhead or from any captured ports. The beachhead. After an assault, you get to place one of these on the coast. You don't have to do it the turn the Marines enter the coast. It acts as a supply source for all Allied air, helicopter, and ground units. Maximum of 10 units can trace supply from a beachhead. The units must be able to trace a supply line to the marker. Air facilities can have all their air units in supply. The air units do not count towards the 10-unit maximum. I don't know, it doesn't seem to be that the air facility does either. A marker can be placed on any Allied control port or coast hex containing the 82nd Air Supply marker. The supply capacity of the port and markers are added together to determine how many U.S. units are supplied from the hex. A beachhead has no attack or defense strength and contributes nothing to ground combat. If it's ever alone, it is destroyed and it can't be used again. There are certain hexes you can't put it in because of swamps. And I've got something penciled out there. I don't know. 3806 might be 3106 or something else. 3806, I don't know why I have that penciled out. It's what it looks like it is. So, again, no clue. It's in Nicaragua, right? Or is that Honduras? Yeah, so the weird thing is that's actually in Nicaragua, and that might be why I had an issue with it. I don't know. Who knows? 3604, 3705. 3604, 3705. And then they jump to here and not here, and I don't know what's going on with that. But you probably don't want to land there. During reinforcements, up to 4 U.S. ground units can enter the map via the USMC beachhead marker. It counts as 1 unit moved during a turn. The beachhead marker does. I don't know what that means. See below. Stacking restrictions are in effect during this phase. Reinforcements can use the beachhead marker to enter the game as long as it's on the map. Okay, here we go. Maximum of 4 U.S. Marines can be moved from each holding box to coast hexes for amphibious assaults and or as reinforcements. You can also do transport strikes, etc., to fly them into play. I think you also pay for withdrawals. You're allowed to withdraw from the USMC beachhead. It sounds like a dangerous option, but if you got to get them out of there. Coast hexes, U.S. Marine, ground, helicopter, Navy 8Bs are in supply when they occupy Caribbean and Pacific coast hexes. Coast hexes are not supply sources, but you automatically get supply from them. U.S. Marines can draw supply from captured ports. The beachhead can be placed in addition on the support for 10 extra units. Limited supply transport capability. The Marine ground units can move a maximum of 4 hexes away from a coast. The coast is not included. The U.S. Marine 1st Recon Special Forces can move anywhere on the map, though. 1 U.S. Marine ground unit can use boat transport in a turn, move from coast to coast together. Must begin regular ground unit movement in a friendly, undamaged port, or in a hex containing the USMC beach marker, or in a coast hex within 5 hexes of the port or marker, and it can move to any other coast hex within 5 hexes of that port or marker. The Marines have mobile SAM battalions, which can do air defense attacks against communist air units. 1 air defense attack can be made per hex. SAM units have an attack value of 1, defense of 0. They can assist in a ground attack against enemy units, but they don't contribute to defense. No biggie. If a SAM is ever alone in a hex, capture with enemy units, it's captured and eliminated. It can take a step loss, but it's permanently eliminated if it does. It can never be rebuilt or reorganized. Okay. God. None of this has to do with this scenario. Why is this an intervention scenario? Because of these air units. That's it. But let's get it all out. The U.S. 82nd Airborne Division, parachute capable. Air units can transport it directly to air facilities on the map with C-141s that must be able to land at the airport. C-130s can land at any air facility if they're carrying them. Once they're on the map, the 82nd Airborne can be moved like by all other Allied transport and air. And helicopters, transported air units also bring units of the 82nd Airborne through paradrop into clear and rough using paradrop rules. If they're placed in a hex containing enemy units, they must attack them. No change in the rules here. Units of the 82nd Airborne are in supply on the turn they enter the map and throughout the whole next turn. This is already handled under the paratrooper rules. 82nd Airborne air supply markers. If the scenario calls for these to enter play, the Allied player receives 1 or 2 air supply markers. These have 2 sides. The 10 side is face up if it's placed on a friendly or captured air facility. The 5 side if a unit is paradropped into clear or rough terrain. This is how many Allied ground, helicopter, Navy 8B units can be supplied per turn by the marker. Air facilities that can trace a supply line to an air supply marker have all their air units in supply. They don't count against the supply capacity. Air supply can be placed on the map in the turn after the first unit of the 82nd Airborne is placed on the map. During the air mission phase, 1 supply marker can be transported to a friendly air facility or can be paradropped on the map. By transport strike, you can paradrop it into an unoccupied hex or one with friendly controlled units. Must be clear or rough. It's got a chance of being shot down. It can be with the USMC marker. It doesn't affect stacking. It cannot move once it's placed on the map. It's a supply source for as long as it's on the map. It doesn't have to trace a line. It's destroyed if ever alone with enemy units. Follow-up U.S. reinforcements. There might be follow-up reinforcements that appear. U.S. Army units do not have the same restrictions to mobility that the Marines do. Once they arrive on the map, they can move beyond the coast hexes that limit the Marine movement. U.S. Army have to trace supply lines, however. As a rule of thumb, U.S. ground units enter. They can be coming from Panama. They can be coming from the Pacific holding box. They can be coming from Mexico, basically. Or We have variable entry according to scenario for the 1-7 and 2-7 Special Forces battalions, which may be transport strikes or whatever. We're going to have them in this scenario. We'll see what their special rules are. Follow-up U.S. reinforcements that enter on the east or west mappage are placed in the Pacific holding boxes. They can go into the USMC beachhead marker, air supply marker on a coast hex, ports that are controlled and undamaged, and damaged or undamaged. Up to 4 U.S. reinforcements on an undamaged port, up to 2 at a damaged port. U.S. reinforcements can also come on the map via transport strike air missions. This doesn't affect the units coming by sea. U.S. reinforcements cannot overstack when they're placed in a hex. If they're placed in a hex that's in an enemy zone of control, they cannot move, although they can attack. If they enter a hex that is not in an enemy's AOC, they can move 1 additional hex. On a given turn, you can have up to 8 sea-transported U.S. reinforcements, I think 4 on each holding box. If fewer than 4 U.S. units can enter the map during the regular ground unit phase, you can also enter during the reinforcement phase, the additional points, and again to the ports, etc. Any that you air transport are brought in by the plane's capacity. C-141s have to land at an airport or be paradropped if they can be. Remember, the 82nd Airborne is completely para-capable. Most other units it will not be. If you're on a C-130, you can land at any friendly air facility or be paradropped. Stacking restrictions apply. Once the air units have brought their loads on the map, they can be moved off north or south map edge to bring units in next turn, or you can base them on the map, and this is the same stuff as 82nd Airborne. You can delay your reinforcements, bring them on. Air and helicopter unit reinforcements are assigned to U.S. forces enter with their parent ground forces. U.S. Navy carrier-based air units appear in the holding boxes, like I've got noted here. Marine and air and helicopters either come in the holding boxes or they can transfer to the board. U.S. Air Force, that's what we're going to have to deal with here. They enter during Allied air mission phase with transfer missions. U.S. air units must land at an air facility in Honduras within 4 of the north coast. Others land because of their unlimited movement anywhere on the map. If no facility is available, they can't enter that turn. Once they reach their air facility, they're put in the used space. The C-130 and 141s can bring on U.S. reinforcements and return, or they can stay. All right, we're gonna stop again for a while. Doing just the rolls is painful. I know it doesn't seem like I'm doing much, but I do need the reminder, and I figure this might be of some value to people trying to watch the whatever they are, intervention. I wanted to say intermediate, something like that. Ports and supply. The U.S. can draw supply based on the number printed on the port. So like this can pull 6 units of supply. This is recorded in, I think, just per unit, as opposed to by stacking limits or anything like that. Units adjacent to the port and in the port can draw supply directly from the port, as long as it's not occupied by the enemy. Actually, even if it's occupied, if you're in there at the same time. You can trace along a road to the port as normal supply can, and then 4 trail hexes away. But it doesn't look like you're able to trace with no roads whatsoever. Now, that leads me to question, hey, does the game actually require... I thought roads and trails were the supply lines. But you were able to go beyond that, and I'm looking to see, is this different, you know? This would be the kind of place where I'd expect, and my way of finding things, because it's just too big a supply line. I think it's probably C45L. They give you 3 different places where it's referenced. None of them are as bolded or anything like that to help you find the primary one. Son of a bitch. I gotta turn my heat off. I can't think with it. It's not that hot. It's just dealing with these rules is that annoying. Fucking detailed. It's not quite a world at war, but it's up there. Trace a supply line, blah, 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 supply line, blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's roads and trails, any combination to the unit drawing, and then 4 hexes without. So yeah, the U.S. Can only utilize its units along the roadways. It can't trace supplies elsewhere, apparently, out of the ports. Does this apply to the headquarters things? I don't. To the USMC and the 82nd Airborne? I don't know. I wouldn't have thought this. I would have thought that like normal supply rules would apply to the U.S. So now I'm like, do we have the supply line rules here? Who the fuck knows? Chances are we won't ever be playing with any intervention units because I won't be able to get through more of this game because it's just really getting to me. Alright, whatever. You can withdraw US units, and you might have to do it, you might want to do it. The reason you'd want to do it is to lower tensions and avoid World War III. If you do so, you can do it out of USMC beachheads, 82nd Air Supply, in coast hexes, or Allied controlled ports. You can also do it with air transport, the beachheads and ports. Maximum of 8 units can leave the map in a turn, 4 from each map edge. When they're required to withdraw, they must move as quickly as possible towards a point of exit. The communists can attack them. The U.S. units defend normally. The U.S. units can continue to attack, but there are some limitations. I am not going to worry too much about them. I think those limitations are going to revolve around trying to get off the map as quickly as possible, and they're going to be a pain in the ass to discern. Well, here we actually have it. You're allowed to try to form defensive lines so other units can exit, trying to eliminate... This is also fuzzy that, you know, as long as you're trying to withdraw, I think you can make an argument for it. Air units and headquarters, once all the ground units have been withdrawn, you must take the air units out of play. They leave from the north map edge, blah, blah, blah. You're able to use the air units and headquarters to do offensive and defensive missions in support of those units. They can also support any units that are allowed to remain in the game. Right, okay. Special rules that are for the intervention ground game. Now, some of these probably should be in non-intervention games, like guerrilla attacks. Insurgency units can perform guerrilla attacks against installations and terrain features. A stack of insurgency units can make 2 guerrilla attacks in 1 or 2 hexes in which they're adjacent. A single unit can attack either a terrain feature or an installation in 1 adjacent hex. A stack can perform 1 or 2 attacks, blah, blah, blah. They have to be in supply. They have to be adjacent to the hex they're attacking. You must have insurgency command points available. And the cost is 1 insurgency if you're outside enemy zones of control or in an enemy zone of control. What the fuck? If you're in a hex with... If the target's in a hex with enemy ground units, it costs 2. You declare the target, you spend the points. You have, okay, so if it's an attack on a bridge, it has a bombardment value of 1. Any other terrain feature has a bombardment value of 2. You add up the bombardment values for each attack. You consult the bombardment table and you roll a die without modifiers. And then you do it to the thing, and the insurgency units will be rotated 180 degrees. They can't move or attack for the rest of the turn. They will defend normally. A D damages something, and that flips SAM AAs to their damage side. Road gets a road out marker, bridge gets a bridge out marker, ports have a damage marker. An A will damage an air facility and hurt the planes that are on it. You can attack either a terrain feature or an installation, not both. You must have at least 2 insurgency units in a hex to make 2 guerrilla attacks. Insurgency units can be stacked with regular ground units and perform attacks. You can only attack each feature once per turn. You can declare as many attacks on a turn as you have points, and units or stacks available. A bridge can be subject to a guerrilla attack as long as it's within 1 hex of the insurgency units making the attack. You don't necessarily have to be right on the bridge, so this could attack that bridge. Whew. Okay, time to pause. I gotta relight to deal with this shit and take a drink. Potatoes are further cooked than I thought, and I'm just gonna take a longer break than that and probably eat dinner and whatnot. I lied. My wife has some mouth issues right now, and I'm trying to get the food really, really soft for her. So I'm going to let it cook a little longer. Okay. Got some potatoes and carrots boiling. Demolitions. During demolitions phase, ground units and insurgency units can attempt to damage or destroy installations and terrain features in the hexes they occupy. Demolitions attempts are using the terrain features bombardment. You can't have done anything else in this turn. You cannot move, attack in ground combat, or reorganize. You must be in supply. Can't do it within an enemy zone of control. You can make 1 attempt per turn. You can make a demolitions attempt, and other units can do other actions. You declare that you're going to. If it's an engineer, the attempt automatically succeeds. No die roll. The result is either a D or A, whatever is best for the target. All other insurgency units have to roll in the terrain feature bombardment table. Against a bridge, it's 2 bombardment points. Road, port, or air facility, you get 7. And no matter how many units are in the hex, a demolitions attempt is made with one of these 2 values. You roll a die, apply modifiers, and la la la. The modifiers are +3 against a port in a home country, and +1 if it's an insurgency unit using demolitions against a road or bridge. So note that if we compare the guerrilla attack, I don't remember what you get. Bridge, no, I don't know. I can't remember what the points are anymore. Here they are. Bombardment against a bridge is only a 1, and other things is a 2. Here it's basically a 2 or a 7. So if you can succeed in if you qualify for demolitions, it's better than doing guerrilla attacks. That's all I'm trying to say. The D does damage, etc. Demolition against port in Nicaragua. The communist player cannot perform demolitions against ports in Nicaragua until the turn after a U.S. ground unit enters the country. He cannot make demolitions attempts against the internal ports of Grenada, San Carlos, and Rama until the second turn after a U.S. ground unit enters Nicaragua. Bridges. If a unit occupies a hex that has more than 1 adjacent bridge, you pick which bridge. Well, you may attack some or all of the bridges. You declare which ones are targets, and you make 1 die roll for all of them. Okay, here I've corrected things, and that's right. Okay, so for air facilities, when you capture them, you don't immediately damage them. They're working. I don't like that. I don't think that's correct, because if you capture an air facility, you do have to do something to get it up to snuff for your own vehicles, but whatever. Like, I think capturing one should automatically damage it. pretty much. Insurgency units that have been placed on the map during the insurgency placement phase can perform demolitions in their turn of placement. They can't move or attack, however. Repair. In the intervention game, damaged terrain features and installations can be fixed. Mobile AA, SAM, logistics, supply units, supply sources, air units, and helicopters can never be repaired. Engineer units are the most efficient at repairs, but any unit can try to, any regular ground unit can try to do it, not insurgency. Installation and terrain features possessing a repair 1 marker are completely repaired during the repair phase. Other installations still undergoing repairs have their repair marker reduced. New repair markers are then replaced with the amount of time required to repair them. Unit must begin the turn in the hex in which repairs will occur. It cannot move or participate in combat. The unit has to remain in the hex throughout the number of turns. The unit must be in supply throughout them. Given unit or stack can attempt to repair only one feature or on a hex side at a time. If there's several repairs, they must be done separately. You declare which units will repair what. You consult the repair chart to see how many turns it's going to take. And you put a repair marker with the number according to that number of turns, and that'll get reduced each subsequent repair phase. If they're interrupted, the repair marker is completely removed, so you don't have partial repair situations. Repairs to ports by armor and infantry have a second number other than the repair marker involved. See below. Once a port is partially repaired, a player can repair something else. Yeah, okay. Right. Repair markers are used to keep track of the number of turns. It's possible for a ground unit to enter a hex where repairs are taking place and take over the duty for another unit that initiated the repairs. You exchange the repairs on the turn after. An engineer unit can substitute for another engineer unit, and armor or infantry for another such unit. Engineers cannot substitute for armor or infantry or vice versa. After all repair markers are adjusted, the player then announces what new installations will be repaired. Ports can take up to 8 turns for non-engineers to repair, and therefore we have a begin port repair and a port partial repair to indicate that you've gone halfway through, because the repair markers only go up to 4. This is mainly dross. Okay. A port partially repaired is not removed if enemy regular ground units attack into the hex, though any repair marker in the hex is removed. If an enemy ground unit pursues into the hex, the port partially repaired is also removed. An attack made solely by insurgency does not cause a repair marker to be removed unless the defending units retreat. If the defending units retreat, the repair marker is removed. If the insurgencies perform a guerrilla attack on the hex containing a repair marker, the marker is removed. If the hex contains a port partially removed repair marker as well, this marker remains in the hex, but any repair marker is removed. Insurgency unit or stack that ends movement in a port containing port partially repaired must have combat since the port is enemy controlled. If the insurgency unit manages to take the hex, the port is no longer in a state of any kind of partial repair. If the player performs a bombardment strike or U.S. naval bombardment in an enemy-occupied hex containing a repair marker, the marker is removed if the bombardment causes another damage to the particular terrain feature, or installation being attacked. It doesn't have to be the one under repair, apparently. If the bombardment has no effect, the repair marker stays there. Okay, so now here it seems to be the one that's under attack, which leads me to believe the same is true with the guerrillas. No additional damage occurs to the terrain feature installation because of the bombardment. So I think you have to be attacking the feature that you're trying to prevent. Okay, let's see if we can get the rest of this. Hidden supply depots. A scenario lists some hidden supply points. These are available to the communist player. The hidden supply points are placed on the information record track up there. When the marker reaches 0, no more hidden supply points can be created. The deployment of the supply depot markers in the countermix limits the communists how many they can place. During step A of the supply phase of his ground unit and air stage. I guess that's supply. Oh, it's part of supply. The communist player can declare he's using hidden supply depot. He immediately expends a hidden supply point and places one of his supply depots on the map in whichever hex he declares he had supplies hidden in. This functions like a normal supply depot. In addition to creating hidden supplies, the communists can also create 2 supply depots in cities, ports, and air facilities in Step D, the normal supply rules. Hidden supplies can be created in hexes in enemy zones of control, but not in a hex containing an enemy unit of any kind. Hidden supplies can be created in any country on the map. It can't be transported once it's placed on the map. It remains in the hex. I don't know how you indicate the difference of them, but yeah. The Cuban Mechanized Brigade. In some scenarios, the Cuban Mechanized Brigade appears in the game. This is 5 units, 2328 tank battalions and 3238 mechanized infantry battalions. This is usually triggered by the U.S. entering Nicaragua. For the Cuban Brigade to appear, the communist player first places a reorganization marker on one of his full-strength FSLN 338 tank regiments inside Nicaragua. The marker is placed during the reorg phase in the turn after the U.S. first enters Nicaragua. In his reorg phase in the following turn, the communist removes the reorg marker and the Nicaraguan tank regiment from the map and puts the Cubans in their place. The Cuban units are placed in or adjacent to the hex from which the Nicaraguan unit was removed. Stacking restrictions obeyed. If the Nicaraguan unit is attacked, the tank can defend normally, and the reorg remains with the tank even if it retreats or takes step losses. The Cuban units will appear during the next communist reorganization phase. But any step losses taken are applied to the Cuban units. Likewise, if the tank regiment is attacked by Allied bombardment strike, the unit suffering must be applied to the Cuban units. It can take a maximum of 4 step losses from Allied attacks, and even if the tank regiment is removed from the map, the 5 Cuban units can appear with the 4 step losses among them. The communist player decides which units will take the step losses. If because of stacking restrictions there's not enough room in the hex or adjacent hexes for the Cubans, the communist player can place on the map only as many Cuban units as he can. The scenario generation system, the communist is allowed to withdraw the Cuban mechanized brigade. During the end turn stage, the communist player declares he'll withdraw it. He removes any remaining units in the brigade from the map. He does not get back his Nicaraguan tank regiment. Okay, what is this? U.S. intelligence failure. During a transfer of Cuban advisors into Nicaragua, there are temporarily enough in the country to man the purported FSLN equipment and form the brigade. A similar event occurred during the Carter administration when it was discovered that a second Soviet brigade existed in Cuba. Okay. Some scenarios allow the communists to move his regular ground units off the south map edge. These will be considered to be threatening the Panama Canal. This will restrict U.S. and Allied reinforcements. During regular ground unit, the communists can have his armor and infantry exit the south map edge. They must have sufficient movement points to exit the map, assuming the first hex off the map has the same terrain. As soon as the regular ground units with a cumulative attack value of 18 have exited the map, no more U.S. or Allied reinforcements scheduled to arrive from the south can come onto the map. Nicaraguan 233 infantry cannot move off the map, they're militia, but any other regular ground units can. Once a communist ground unit has moved off the south map, it can never return. There are no victory points for this. If U.S. or Allied reinforcements from the south have already moved onto the map, they remain on map, but others will be prevented. Units of the U.S. 193rd Infantry Brigade, Southern Command, Task Force Bayonet, perhaps some Special Forces, and Colombian units are primarily affected. And then we go to the political rules, and now I really do have to get my potatoes dealt with. The part of the game that I'd consider the most interesting, political considerations. Yeah, of course, I'm into a war game. Why? Because I want to play the meta game above it. But it's not really that exciting here. So, this is restrictions on specific units that are in play here. Costa Rica starts neutral, it cannot move. El Salvador starts out, okay, so let's try to look. While Costa Rica is neutral, U.S. can enter, but cannot enter a hex completely within Nicaragua from Costa Rica. This is the level of things that you have here. El Salvador, its air units can supply close air support only in support of Salvadorian, U.S., CIA, Israeli, CM. A series of limitations is a part of this, and the communists have a similar list. This is to represent some of the inter-ideology problems between some of the factions, and basically look it up as you need. And that's it. Wait, where's the World War III stuff? Oh, shit. Yeah. Optional rules. Weather. Okay. Weather is generally considered to be clear unless the scenario says otherwise. Well, here we add a rule where you roll a die for weather. And how often is it? I don't know. During the endgame turn, starting with the turn in which weather must be determined, you roll on the weather table. Rain wipes out the trails. If you're near the Caribbean, you get a penalty for... in ground combat, defending units within 4 hexes receive a -1 die roll modifier. Well, defending units don't... Like, a -1 die roll modifier sounds good. And it is. Attack helicopters don't give the column shift when rain is there. Heavy rain... Oh, wait. Trails are no longer... Yeah, trails are still no longer usable. There's an additional movement point cost to cross unblocked river, unbridged river hex sides. In ground combat, if you're within 5 hexes of the Caribbean, you get a -2 modifier. In all other ground combats beyond 5 hexes, there's a -1. The attack helicopters cannot be used at all except for where they allowed, well, except for transfers. Marine security teams. These are attached to CIA operations. This gives a column shift in the favor of CIA EW engineers when they're alone defending. This is in addition to whatever advantages the CIA engineering gets. Ground unit bombardment, 2 additional die roll modifiers for bombardment strike and U.S. naval bombardment. A penalty for shooting into yucky terrain like forests and swamps where there's cover, and the target's a communist tank unit in a hex containing a road and attacked by U.S. smart bombs. The tank cannot be attacked in a city. And I'm going to play with these. Nicaraguan border mines. Let's see if we can find them. Here they are. The borders around Nicaragua have been heavily mined by the Sandinistas. Hexes in Nicaragua that are mined are noted on the map. An allied regular ground unit or stack has to spend an extra movement point to cross that. Once the mined border has been moved into, other allied units don't have to pay. We may need to use some kind of markers to indicate where the mines have been wiped out. Nicaraguan motor torpedo boat attack. In the turn the U.S. Marines first used an amphibious assault against a hex on either coast of Nicaragua. The communist player can attempt a motor torpedo boat attack against U.S. Navy vessels. One attack can be declared in a game per invasion on the east and west coast. During the end of turn stage, the communist player rolls a die. On a 6, he gets a victory point. Whatever, you know. Optional supply. Major supply in Swan Island in the Caribbean. It's not on the board. This facility can supply Contra units in coastal hexes. FDN and ARDA are considered to be in supply if they can trace a supply line to an Allied-controlled city, town, port, or village on the eastern and northern Honduran coast. We'll see if I can remember this. They're also in supply if they capture a town, port, or village on the eastern coast of Nicaragua. FDN and ARDA that can trace supply line to the captured hex are in supply. FDN and ARDA can also use ports in Nicaragua on the Pacific coast. If a port is captured by the FDN or ARDA, it must be undamaged to act as a source of supply. Repairs can be made, blah, blah, blah. Additional communist supply sources. The communists can create new supply sources on the map. There are 2 methods. During a step A of his supply phase, he can expend 5 supply depot markers, hidden supply points, or a combination to create a communist supply source. And there are markers for these. These can be placed in any hex in Nicaragua or Honduras containing a communist regular unit. The marker will act as a regular supply source. A second method is the communist player during step A of his supply phase can remove a logistics supply unit on the map and replace it with a communist supply source marker on the same hex. You probably don't want to do this. I don't know. Once the marker is on the place, it can't be converted back to a logistics supply unit. I don't remember how logistics supply units work, but I thought they were like regular supply sources, except they can move. So I don't know why you'd want to do that. Maybe we look. These act like regular supply sources. Yeah, I don't know why you'd want to convert them into a regular supply unit. Can't think of a reason. Supply lines. This is to make supply a little harder because of the mountainous areas. Infantry armor or insurgency is in supply if it can trace a supply line of 12 infantry movement points from the hex that the unit occupies to a friendly supply source or depot, entrenchment, or fortification, or for allied units to a USMC Beachhead or 82nd Airborne. Do not count the hex occupied. Bridge out and road outs do affect supply lines now. All right, do I want to play with this? So this is interesting because remember the USMC, the US used different supply rules. Well, now they use the same supply rules. What's up with that? You get this feeling that like maybe the rules aren't written coherently or something. I don't know. Optional repair rules. Yeah, I don't know if I want to fiddle around with any of this shit. I like the weather. I'm okay with these. We get to the optional supply rules. I'm okay until we get to that tracing, and I'm kind of like, where are we going? The optional repair, you're given resource points in a scenario. You have to expend these to perform repairs. And so you have a limitation on how much repair point that you can play. Again, I'll start thinking about these as I enter into games. Optional air rolls. I don't know how much time I have. Again, you know, trying to time dinner with my wife is a hard thing. It really is. Normally we have a fixed time that we have dinner, but today I heard, oh, I'd like to eat early, and now it's kind of turning into that fixed time. So I don't understand these things. Got some special types of air rolls, which I think only apply to US planes. There might be some Soviet stuff that can do this, though. I don't see, those are Cubans. Yeah, some of the Soviet stuff has the circles on here. That'll indicate that they can fire special munitions. Getting Soviet intervention is probably not trivial, though. That's probably harder than getting U.S. intervention. Okay, the U.S. AWACS air units. The systems are not fully compatible between the E3 and E2. The U.S. Air Force E3 AWACS benefits U.S. Air Force and all allied units, but the Navy and Marines need the E2. You need the Navy E2 AWACS units, and they don't coordinate. There's no additional effect if they overlap. It's just, you know, you can do interceptions and get the bonuses. Standoff attacks. Some weapons, some air units can do a standoff weapon attack. They have this little circle in there, and we saw the Soviets have them too. We got a list of the type of planes that have it. It's a colored circle. The scenario indicates standoff attacks. You'll have a track of those number of attacks. The key with this is whenever you fire one, well, you use up your resources on it. You can use it in bombardment and close air support missions. Remember, this is the bombardment factor. You set your standoff attack capable units aside. You move your air mission to the hex that's within 4 hexes of the target. When the air mission marker moves, it's subject to normal air defense and interception. But now, you don't have to get as close to the enemy target. At 4 hex distance, you might not be able to be detected by the EW and air and ground units, so you might not be intercepted. You announce you're making the standoff attack. You spend a marker, I think. I think you just put one marker for all the planes. A stack can perform both a bombardment and a close air support in the same mission. The standoff attack marker only moves down once, even if you're using both types of mission there. So that almost definitely, because one plane would be on one mission, one plane would be on another. You do the strike normally from a 4 hex range, and then you can return back without being in danger. You can do this in conjunction with other air units, but the other air units have to fly. If they're going to do bombardment or whatever, they have to fly in and actually get in location. No, if you combine bombardment missions, you're not allowed to do the standoff with those. Which it all makes sense. Okay, you've got interception capabilities that are also standoff. Only US F-14s can do this. The F-14 or a stack of them can use standoff air capacity only once during a mission. If it's escorting other units, it can do it during an interception mission. Otherwise, if the escort is escorting other units, yeah, you can use the ability against one interception mission. Everything else will be using normal fighting capability. You announce the F-14s will do a standoff. The stack makes one standoff air attack. They're automatically the attackers in the ensuing combat, and the air combat ratio is normal. You roll a die, you check the combat table for the intensity level. If the communist units intercepted the air units and they take step losses or a return, the escorting F-14 successfully forced the communists to break off the attack. And any losses on the Allied units are ignored because you're firing from too far away for them to engage. If the F-14s get any step losses or returns when intercepting communist units, only the communist units are affected. This is on an interception. If the communist units intercept Allied air units and the air combat costs for step losses are returned only for the US units, the F-14's air-to-air missiles were ineffective and the damages are actually applied. If the F-14s intercept, same thing. If you don't affect the communist units, you take your damage. Okay. U.S. special munitions. U.S. have some special weapons in this, and this is the same kind of stuff they have in Gulf Strike 2. We got 3 types: smart bombs, incendiary bombs, and cluster bombs. This should be used with the U.S. command restrictions, which we haven't gotten to yet. Scenario indicates each type of U.S. special munition the Allied player receives. The Allied player places 3 special munitions markers on his information track. Once he runs out, he can't use that type. You can only use one type on a given air mission. Thus, a stack of U.S. air units that uses special munitions can only use one type. Ba, ba, ba. Okay, what do we have? We have some words here. U.S. air units cannot combine special munitions with a standoff air attack or bombardment strike or close air support mission. U.S. F-14s can use standoff air attack, though, when escorting other U.S. Navy units that use special munitions. When you activate an air unit, you don't have to announce that you're using special munitions. Once you get into the proper location and interceptions have been checked and whatever, when you're intercepted, you declare if you're using special munitions and what type you're using, or that you're not using special munitions. If you declare the special munitions, you expend them before the interception is resolved. You resolve the interception, then you determine whether or not you're continuing. The special munitions are now a known factor, so further interceptions could be a problem. If you don't get intercepted, you declare it when you decide to fire. You move the marker down. Once the mission is completed, the air units are forced to abort. They return to their holding spot, whatever. Only U.S. can use them. You must have a bombardment value of 1 or higher to use them. You can use them in bombardment strike and offensive close air support. Everybody has to use the same type of munition. You cannot use them in interception, escort, aerial counterinsurgency. The biggie there being the aerial counterinsurgency or in defense of U.S. Marine air support. Okay, smart bombs. Smart bombs can attack a target from a hex adjacent to the target hex. This means you can't be attacked by air defense in that hex. The air units can be attacked by communist interception markers while you move and by anything you do fly through. When used in offensive close air support missions, smart bombs give a one-column shift to the right when resolving ground combat against communist units. This is in addition to the die roll modifier. When used in a bombardment strike, smart bombs give a modifier based on what you're trying to bomb. Incendiary bombs. If you're using incendiary bombs, you must be in the same hex as the target. These air units can be attacked by communist air defense and interception. They give a +2 die modifier when used in bombardment strike against a communist ground unit. When used in offensive close air support, they provide a 2-column shift to the right against that unit in addition to the positive die rolls. These cannot be used in cities, ports, and towns. No firebombing Central America. They cannot be used in unoccupied road hexes in allied countries during the first 3 turns of the scenario, the reason being refugees. If a communist regular ground unit occupies a road hex in an allied country, incendiary bombs can be used against it, however. Okay. Cluster bombs. You can use cluster bombs in the same hex as the target. They can be attacked by normal air defense. They give some modifiers, good at hitting roads and airstrip and airports. When used in close air support mission, they increase the bombardment by 1 targeted against a stack of communist units to a maximum of 3. You can't use it in cities. You can't use it in hexes in allied countries containing cities and ports and towns. They cannot be used in unoccupied road hexes in allied countries during the first 3 turns of the scenario. Unless, I guess, a communist regular ground unit, not insurgency, is in the road hex. Same thing as the incendiaries. In offensive close air support, they cannot be used in ports or towns. Chemical warfare. There's 2 types of chemical attacks in the game, both used by the communists, persistent and non-persistent. A scenario indicates the number and type of chemical weapons the communists receive. For some reason, the U.S. will not use its chemical stocks. The incendiaries are basically chemical weapons. Pass it on. A scenario will indicate the number, if any, of each type of weapon they receive. The chemical warfare markers are placed on the information record track. As a form of chemical weapons is used, the communist player pays them off down the track until it hits 0 or whatever. They must have them. Okay, the unit employing them must be in supply. Chemical weapons can't be used in cities, towns, villages, or ports inside Nicaragua. That would piss off the Sandinistas. Chemical weapons used by the communist player has an effect on U.S. command restrictions. We'll get to those. Persistent chemical weapons. These can be used by Cuban and Soviet units and by Nicaraguan artillery units. One of these can use persistent chemical weapon attack against an unoccupied adjacent hex during reserve movement and the communist player's ground and air stage, and up to 2 attacks during the ground combat phase of the allied player's ground and air stage. The employment of persistent weapons removes U.S. command restrictions. After all communist units possessing reserve movement markers have completed their movement, the communists can have 1 eligible communist unit place a persistent chemical weapons marker in an adjacent hex. The hex in which the marker is placed cannot be occupied by allied units. The marker remains in the hex throughout the ground and air stage of the allied player. It'll have the following effects. Any stack of allied, including U.S. regular ground or insurgency units entering it, takes a step loss. All allied units that enter the hex must expend 1 movement point in addition to normal movement cost. So this is one of the places where armored units going through the jungle mountain trails is important that they go 1 by 1 if you drop a big nasty fart there. Even though U.S. units have protective suits, they would be extremely cumbersome and people would give up and walk away or something. Allied combat. This isn't like Omaha Beachhead, where units can recover friction points, so it feels like too extreme loss to take the step losses. But if a unit or stack capable of chemical warfare is forced to retreat, the communist player can immediately announce that it's using persistent chemical weapons. A persistent chemical weapons marker is placed in the hex from which the unit retreated. No allied unit can pursue into that hex. A maximum of 2 units or stacks can use persistent weapons in retreat. You can't use it during the communist ground unit stage. Okay. Non-persistent chemical weapons. The communists can use Nicaraguan artillery to deliver non-persistent chemical weapons against adjacent allied units. Non-persistent weapons never to be used against stacks containing U.S. ground units. That would probably cause World War III. Non-persistent chemical weapons are used during the communist player's ground combat phase. A maximum of 1 attack can be made in a turn. You select a Nicaraguan artillery unit. You indicate which hex will be subject to the attack. You roll a die and look on the persistent chemical weapons table to determine the effects of the attack. Well, that's strange. We're using non-persistent chemical weapons. What's up with that? I don't know. I mean, what am I going to do when I find this? Well, if I find it. Shitty. I don't know what I'm going to do if I do find this. Like, if it's wrong, if it's right. Yeah, obviously something's wrong. Well, I'm not going to find the rules for it. That's what I'm going to do. Is this the Allied book? That's why. Alright, let's look here. We got any kind of chemical weapons chart? Flipping through, looking for... I got nothing, man. I got nothing. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not like I've ever used chemical weapons in the game, but I keep flipping through this, and there it is, non-persistent chemical weapons table. Okay, so it gives a number of step losses, and this is why I started penciling things in, because there's obviously errors even if I don't have the errata, you know. And there doesn't appear to be any. The unit that performed the attack cannot participate in any other ground combat. The allied unit or stack that was attacked can be ignored by the communist player when resolving other ground combats. The unit can be attacked if the communist player wishes. An allied unit or stack loses its zone of control for the rest of the turn, and it can reduce 1 step loss by retreating the affected unit or stack 2 hexes. If the FDN or ARDA units were attacked by the weapons, there are no repercussions and U.S. command restriction remains in effect for non-persistent. If the attack is made on any other allied units, U.S. command restrictions are lifted. And remember, you can't use them against U.S. units. The key point there being, it's not a large-scale persistent attack. We throw our gas masks on, not the World War III thing, probably. U.S. special munitions and chemical warfare rules are being used. The U.S. command restrictions must also be used. The Allied player is restricted by political considerations in the use of air units and special munitions. U.S. command restrictions are in effect until a Nicaraguan unit conducts a non-persistent chemical weapons against any Allied unit, except FDN or ARDA, or a persistent chemical weapons attack. Once such an attack's been made, the Allied player is freed from their command restrictions. B-52s can't perform bombardment strike missions in hex containing cities, towns, villages, or ports. By the way, we will not be playing with these rules on the SSN 20 game because it just doesn't make sense. Here the worry is you got to get rid of the missiles, so the same engagement rules don't apply. This is for other types of scenarios primarily. They cannot perform bombardment strikes against unoccupied road hexes in allied countries. The U.S. units cannot perform bombardment strike missions at all in unoccupied road hexes in allied countries during the first 3 turns of the scenario. We already had that discussed with the special munitions. The U.S. air units cannot use incendiary bombs and hexes in an allied country that contains the following features: city, port, or town. They cannot be used in unoccupied road hexes in allied countries during the first 3 turns. So this was covered before as a general rule. Now it's being put into the command restrictions. What's up with that? I don't know. And the general rule probably said you should use the command restrictions. U.S. air units cannot use cluster bombs against any hex containing a city, nor can they be used in hexes in any allied country that contains a port or town. If communist regular unit or stack occupies a road hex during the first 3 turns, you can bombardment strike it. You can use cluster and incendiary. It's the base rules for that. And that is the end of that. Where are we going to use any of these rules? That's a good question. There are some intervention game scenarios. We're going to be playing one. Most of them are ahistorical. On top of that, and maybe all of them, I don't know. On top of that, then there's the scenario generator rules, which basically gives you an intervention level game. But every time I fucking played one, it came out with a non-intervention scenario. Yeah, whatever. That's that. I'll finish my setup for this sucker, and we'll talk about that and start it or something. It's like a 1-turn scenario, so I'm not expecting that to take much time, and then we'll go on to something that's more main eventy, but I can't guarantee how many scenarios more I'm going to play. All right, up it goes.